So just a brief introduction into this video. In high school, for my junior thesis, I had to write a 6-page paper on a major historical event that happened in the 1900s. And of course, I chose the history of rock, specifically the Beatles. So, without further ado, this is my analysis on the Beatles invasion, how the 60s Brit rock quartet created a legacy to last for ages. Hey guys, it's Madeline here. So imagine this. The year is 1956. England is surrounded by warfront damage and morale is low. Many citizens are looking to America as a symbol of prosperity and life. American hits dominate popular culture at this time, and no English musician is able to rise up the charts to fame. 2 teenage boys embraced American culture at this time and aspired to create music of their own. These 2 boys were none other than the legendary John Lennon and Paul McCartney. They started off as writing partners in the living room of McCartney's father, where together they wrote their earlier hits, including the famous She Loves You. Little did they know, these 2 boys would soon grow to start a massive movement known as the British Invasion and become arguably the most beloved songwriters and musicians of all time. Through their work in the Beatles, they helped to not only alter or introduce a multitude of practices to the music industry, but also to inspire love throughout the world by popularizing the culture of minority groups and standing as a symbol of peace and joy in a time of war. Because these practices and ideals are still held standard and relevant to our generation, the Beatles' legacy remains a vital component in today's culture, a legacy that is not likely to die out in the next few decades. Due to the Beatles' mass popularity, so many musicians were racing to copy everything that these boys were doing. Eric Burdon of the Animals, another band of the British Invasion, has been reported saying that he and his group
sort of manufacture you to be like the Beatles, and for the British Invasion for everyone to sort of be just alike?
Oh yeah, we were dressed like little dolls. They dressed us up in the most strange costumes.
One aspect that many bands took from the Beatles was their feature of 2 guitarists, a lead guitarist and the additional rhythm guitarist. Though the guitar was not a new instrument at this time, the digital age was just starting to kick off, and Lennon and McCartney were among those of the first generation to have access to electric guitars. Most popular music, especially that in America, was characterized by brass or other wind instruments and were jazzy in style and groove. The use of a rhythm guitarist, lead guitarist, and lack of wind instruments was foreign to the world of music. Because so many musicians at this time were copying everything the Beatles were doing, this caused this unique arrangement of instruments to become the norm. As a result, band-based groups were pushed out of popularity and replaced with guitar and drum-based groups. This characterizes most of the popular music today, where wind arrangements are a novelty. But that wasn't the only thing that the Beatles pushed out of popularity. Since the start of jazz, a musician's main source of income came from live shows. A large majority of musicians at that time did not write the songs released on any of their records, and many of them didn't even play the instruments either. Many even admitted that they were not fond of the songs played on their records. Additionally, most songs released at this time were merely written as singles, songs that were simple, catchy, and fun to dance to. This means that most mainstream music was upbeat, repetitive, bubbly, and often watered down. In 1966, screaming Beatles fans, a phenomenon coined Beatlemania, became so disruptive during live performances that no one could hear the band playing. As a result, the boys decided that they would quit playing live shows to become the first recording band, a band that works exclusively in the studio. This was unheard of for most musicians and could have been detrimental to the popularity and financial income for any band at this time. But for the Beatles, who had written most of their biggest hits, She Loves You became their first to top the charts in the UK, and I Wanna Hold Your Hand was their first big break in America, it is debatable that this change benefited the group and made them even greater than they already were, giving them more time to focus on writing meaningful, well-thought-out songs that said something, instead of just entertaining or standing as background noise. With this new focus on writing songs with a deeper meaning, the band pushed all cover bands off the charts and made way for writers of art rock to achieve fame. Even before the band stopped performing live, they showed a gradual but sure change in emphasis to songwriting since their first album. This began to show on Rubber Soul, where guitarist George Harrison influenced Lennon to include Indian instruments. This was the band's first record to not be a collection of singles. Instead of making each song to be a hit, to be popular, and to instantly gain success, they created each song that connected to each other in some kind of way. They all related to each other in feelings that they were experiencing at that time, influences, and they all showcased somewhat similar topics between them. This was another novelty in the industry at that time, and a concept that would follow in all succeeding albums from the band. This allowed for further development towards Sgt. Pepper's, as the songs on this album served a more personal purpose, other than simply a collection of popular hits. On the next record, Revolver, McCartney's song Eleanor Rigby became a massive hit upon release. Being a complex pop song characterized by dark or depressing moods about a lonely woman who died in a church, the Beatles showed the world that a serious, well-written song could still find success among a sea of dance tunes. This new idea was followed by a wave of new, seriously written songs such as Behind Blue Eyes by The Who, which peaked at number 34 for 11 weeks on the Billboard Top 100 charts. Following the announcement to stop touring, the band released their most commercially successful album yet, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This album not only became known as the first concept album, an album of songs that contribute to a singular or central idea, but it included the famous A Day in the Life, a revolutionary song for its combination of two contrasting moods, a feat accomplished by contributions from two very different songwriters. As the song's title suggests, A Day in the Life follows the thought process in a day of both Lennon and McCartney respectively, where Lennon is pondering over modern world events in a more depressing, slower mood, and then it goes into the bridge, some would say, where McCartney talks about a day where he's rushing to get to the bus for school. It adds a happy, more upbeat, and less depressing aspect to the topics that Lennon brings up. In addition, this song also had a big feature of an orchestra in this case. Lennon was the one who had originally had the idea of including an orchestra element in the song. McCartney was the one who decided that he wanted the orchestra to do something completely different than anything anyone had ever accomplished in classical history. However, when he tried to tell the orchestra what to do with these songs, they had no clue what they were supposed to do, and McCartney says this is because classical musicians have no creativity. As a result, George Martin was tasked with writing music for each of the orchestra players, and he is quoted saying, "What I did there was to write, at the beginning of the 24 bars, the lowest possible note for each of the instruments in the orchestra. At the end of the 24 bars, I wrote the highest note each instrument could reach that was near a chord of E major. Then I put a squiggly line right through the 24 bars, with reference points to tell them roughly what note they should have reached during each bar. The musicians also had instructions to slide as gracefully as possible between one note and the next. Everyone was to start as quietly as possible, almost inaudibly, and end in a, metaphorically, lung-bursting tumult. And in addition to this extraordinary of musical gymnastics, I told them that they were to disobey the most fundamental rule of the orchestra. They were not to listen to their neighbors. A well-schooled orchestra plays, ideally, like one man, following the leader. I emphasized that this was exactly what they must not do. I told them, I want everyone to be an individual. It's every man for himself. Don't listen to the fellow next to you. If he's a third away from you, and you think he's going too fast, let him go. Just do your own slide up your own way." Needless to say, they were amazed. They had certainly never been told that before. It is a common known fact that the Beatles did not know how to read music. George Martin knew how to read music, but he specifically told Lennon and McCartney that they should not learn. There are quite a few musicians in our day and age now that refuse to learn how to read music, specifically for this fact. This is an example of nonconformity, which is breaking all of the rules that were set down in the 1950s, and by popular music at this time. If you look at pop culture and all of the TV shows that were being released at this point, all of the musicians, they were all showing that everything was fine and dandy, there was nothing wrong with the world. Most pop culture in the 1950s, at least in America, was characterized by conformity. Most of them appealed to the white population of this time living in suburbs. A Day in the Life broke all of those rules and showed musicians that you don't have to be intellectual or philosophical in the way the music is written in order to make a really good song. You can be extremely chaotic and the song can still be successful, it can still be valued, and it can still be praised. Instead of writing a song to party and have fun to, Lennon and McCartney painted a story. They released a piece of art that was meant to be relished as a whole, not to enjoy as a snack. Without the Beatles, many of the music we know and love today would probably not exist. Modern groups such as Panic at the Disco, Nirvana, and Foo Fighters credit their success to the Beatles' influence. Additionally, after the band first arrived in America in 1963, they opened a door to allow other British musicians to find their following in the country. And this turn of events also started up the massive British invasion that we now know of today. Groups such as the Animals or the Yardbirds might have never been able to achieve success without them, and some of these bands helped to contribute to the evolving industry as well. The Kinks helped to popularize power chords and distortion, which has been attributed to the start of the post-punk and heavy metal movements. The Who built off of the idea of the concept album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and went on to release the first rock opera, Tommy, where the tracks of the album correlate to a single story, just like a musical or opera production would. Even the Rolling Stones, commonly known as the antithesis to the Beatles, defied the legacy that the Beatles had paved way for, and reminded the world that music doesn't have to be serious or complicated. Being a Beatle was difficult and time-consuming work. They showed the world, the industry, and up-and-coming musicians that you can still find success and personal accomplishment writing fun, dance-worthy tunes like those of the 1950s and early 60s. But the Beatles did not only make a huge impact based on physical characteristics or components of their music. They also stood as a beacon and symbol of love and peace, in addition to Lennon's open opposition to the Vietnam War. Compared to the 1930s and the Great Depression in America, the 1950s and 60s seemed like a haven in American history. But after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the Civil Rights Movement, and U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, American people, especially American youth, began to question the integrity of their leaders. This fact is important because young American youth are the new voters. They're the ones who shape the future of the country. And this is important because the Beatles helped to shape that generation and make them where we are in our society today. The Beatles made their first appearance in America shortly after John F. Kennedy's assassination. American morale was in a rut, so it is no wonder that the handsome, charismatic Beatles made such a hit so quickly. The Vietnam War was extremely controversial, and Eric Burdon has reported that upon arrival to the US, he and his band were told, "When you arrive in America, don't mention the war." We felt that we were being gagged.
We met people like young Americans who would talk to me, "Oh, we're so glad you came, you know, we've been waiting to cut loose and feel freer in this society." There was nothing but the fear and the terror of communist invasion and the Bay of Pigs.
For the Beatles in particular, their ideas of love and unity that bled into their songwriting impacted the world and listeners in a way like no other before them. With songs such as Nowhere Man, The Fool on the Hill, and All You Need Is Love, the band spoke out against the controversial Vietnam War and advocated for peace by suggesting that modern customs are working to drive people apart and cause conflict. As Lennon claims, if we can show harmony and genuine love for each other as fellow human beings, feelings, there would be no need for war, and there is nothing we will not be able to accomplish. In a subtle way, thanks to Harrison's newfound religion in India, his sitar playing on albums such as Rubber Soul and Revolver introduced music influences of minority groups to a vast multitude of cultures worldwide. The Beatles had started out with jazz from America, a genre originating from African American styles, added their own little spice of English charm, and continued to draw more inspiration from other genres. This variety of styles can range from folk, such as the continuing story of Bungalow Bill, to proto-punks, such as Helter Skelter on their self-titled double LP. They brought the far corners of the earth together by combining music styles and cultures. Lennon especially remained an important activist against the notorious Vietnam War both during and after his involvement in the Beatles. His song All You Need Is Love, with its message that we can achieve anything if we work together, remained at the top of the music charts for 3 consecutive weeks. To this day, so many of the Beatles' biggest hits stand as anthems for love and acceptance. McCartney has said himself that he and the other Beatles never expected their message to remain this relevant for so many generations.
We expected it to last 10 years, but it keeps going on and on and on, and it keeps being relevant.
Because the Beatles were at the head of the British invasion and most of American pop culture during the 1960s, they were able to influence much of what we now know to be the norm. But in addition to their instrumental arrangements and songwriting styles that define most modern rock music today, the band had an even bigger, more personal impact on those who heard their songs back then, offering hope to a divided, war-devastated nation. It is ironic that England had looked to America for inspiration when their own company has had such a long-lasting effect on ours. In today's world, and after the effects of 9/11, the Cold War, the Iraq War, and other modern issues in the US, Americans no longer feel confident about their place in the world. The Beatles' music still lives on today because it was written as a call for peace during a time where this confidence still did not exist. We are constantly looking for something new, something to distract us from the hardships we face in the world due to politics, environmental shifts, and trials in our personal lives. Ergo, that era has not changed, and neither has the story that the Beatles have told ended. Until we are finally at peace, the Beatles' music will continue to be relevant. And as life will always have its downfalls, odds are that their call for love and peace will live on for generations to come. So I hope you guys enjoyed my little analysis. Fun fact, my history teacher completely shot me down. I didn't get a terrible grade, I got a B, but it was a wake-up call for me. I hope this video went over well, and I hope that the changes that I did make to my article were able to make sense, and that I could teach you some things that you didn't already know. So thanks guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and remember to play it loud. But he specifically told John and Lennon, okay, John and Lennon are the same person.